everyone, and welcome to this special session of the EoF School 2025. Even though we are in the mourning period following the loss of Pope Francis, we are grateful and happy to be together for this special session of the EoF School after some months with interactive lectorials. Today's guest lecturer is Professor Emerita Jennifer Nedelsky, and we are live from Polo Lionello Bonfanti in Loppiano, Italy. After Nedelsky's lecture, there will be some time for Q&A, so you may start preparing your questions, and we will collect them both from the audience present here today and from the YouTube chat towards the end of Nedelsky's talk. But first, let me give the floor to Professor Lugino Bruni for some welcoming words.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending on your place in the world. And I'm very glad to be here to have the honor to give just an introductory address to all of you here in Loppiano during this beautiful workshop, today's workshop with Jennifer Nedelsky today and tomorrow. And also, in particular, to all of you in the Zoom, in the YouTube, all over the world. This is the first EoF school after I would say, quotation, after Francesco's departure, because Papa Francesco is still present among us for two reasons. First, for the people who have the faith, the religious faith that we know in Christianity, in many other religions, that death is not the last word on life of the people, on the life of the people, but also because we know that in general, for every person, death is not the last word, because life continues after that. That is true for every person. And then it's particularly true for one person like Papa Francesco, who started so many processes. As he loved to say, don't occupy spaces, but activate processes. And the economy of Francesco is one of the most meaningful processes that Pope Francis has activated during his beautiful, accomplished, flourishing life. But then we are moved, of course, because we are still in the morning. We are still in these days, special days, also waiting for the conclave. What the church will select as the heir of Papa Francesco. And then EoF School is an essential part of Francesco heritage. And then this is also a new start for economy of Francesco. Is a new start with a huge and immense gratitude for these 6 years with him. 6 years of beautiful things we lived and we saw. Then first is thank you, Papa Francesco. Thank you for these beautiful years with you. And second is also a thank you for the privilege and for the responsibility for being part of this heritage. Then to keep the heritage at the same time to develop, to spread all over the world the heritage of the economy of Francesco. And then the Jubilee at the end of November, then we, of course, we are looking forward to all of you to come there. Then we will go to Rome, to his tomb, to his Santa Maria Maggiore, to say thank you personally to Papa Francesco. Will be also a way to celebrate this new stage, this new season of economy of Francesco that we really think, we really hope, and we think that will be even more beautiful than the first stage, the first season. Then in this occasion, a special occasion that wasn't of course planned before, but this new start, to have a Jennifer Nedelsky speech, is a special lecture, special reflection, even I would say meditation on care, on work, from one of the leading figures all over the world, from on this special issue of care that is part of Francesco's economy. Is not by chance that we named one of the villages Work and Care, because Work and Care was exactly inspired by the work of Jennifer Nedelsky, because of course we knew before. And then we are really honored to have Jennifer with us for these 2 or 3 days in Loppiano, where there is also the economic community, but Loppiano is also, the Polo is also the headquarter, operational headquarter of the economy of Francesco, with Maria, Chiara, the old staff. Today also Rita, Maria, Stefano, Luca are here with us. We are so grateful to them. Then, but for the presentation of Jennifer in a very institutional, serious way, I give the microphone to Maria. Thank you very much.
Of Toronto. She's an important friend, colleague, and source of inspiration for the economy of Francesco, and has been for years. Thanks also to Professor Bruni. Already in the 2021 edition of the EoF School, Professor Nedelsky was a lecturer speaking about care for the earth. She has been an important resource to the Work and Care Village, as was mentioned, and today she serves as a member of the scientific committee of the EoF Foundation and will also be mentoring in the EoF Academy with her knowledge. One of her most recent achievements is the pioneering and important book co-authored with Tom Allison, Part-Time for All, a Care Manifesto, where they propose the simple yet revolutionary idea of working less to have more time for care in a very concrete and well-founded way. We are eager to hear your words, Professor Nedelsky. Thank you very much for being here with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So first I want to thank Professor Bruni for inviting me, and to all of the people who have worked so hard to make this such a pleasure, so everything's so smooth and welcoming. It really is a great delight to be here. And it's a particular privilege to have a chance to meet with and talk to young people who are engaging with issues related to my work. You are our future and our hope, and it's nice for me to have a sense that this is not hope that is blind to the problems and institutional failures that surround us, but it is still hope, alive to the beauty and love and community in our lives. But I do feel called to say today that we have this conversation in the faces of crisis, right? We have a climate crisis. We have a crisis of democracy all over the world. We have a crisis of failure to respect human dignity all over the world. I am both American and Canadian, and as you all know, this is a very dark time. And so sometimes people might be tempted to say, well, the niceties of care, we don't really have time for those, right? We need to build up our military to protect ourselves. We need to fight the good fight. And this is a mistake, I think, that care is the foundation of our lives together, our capacity to build a relationship which will enable us to fight for the values that matter. And so we cannot forget these crises, but we cannot let them overwhelm us. And it's been a pleasure to me today to hear my young colleagues talk about the many complexities of work and care. And so I know that some of you are very, very familiar with my work. And so the summary I will give today, you already know, but I assume others of you don't know it that well. So we'll be somewhere in between. Okay, so let me just begin with a brief kind of introduction to the overall project. And that is to remind us all that every society has a structure of norms, institutions, laws that organize the way productive work is done, enterprise of all kinds, and the way that care is provided. And that organization of work and care profoundly shapes the kinds of relationships that people have with one another and with the natural world. As you'll hear, we argue that norms have to change so that no one does paid work more than 30 hours a week, and everyone no exceptions, does unpaid care at least 22 hours a week. So a useful definition of care, we actually already saw this earlier, is the relationships and activities involved in maintaining people on a daily basis and intergenerationally. And we include care for nature and care for culture. We believe that the embodied work of direct care teaches people to recognize their fundamental embodiment in their profound interdependence, not just with each other, but with all of creation. As Pope Francis said, our body establishes us in direct relationship with the environment and with other living beings. In doing the daily care of work, we connect to that embodied nature and its interdependence. So now I want to turn, some of you already know this, but I always like to go back to where I began with this project, and I capture it in the preface to the book. So I'll read you this excerpt from that. One of the most important insights I got from having my children was the importance of routine physical caretaking for forming the basic bonds of connection. That initial insight broadened into a belief that physical caretaking is part of what roots us in the world and permits us to feel a connection with the material foundations of life, from the care the earth requires to the respect for the labor that permits us to live as we do. The dominant culture of North America, and I venture to say Western Europe, treats virtually all forms of physical caretaking with contempt. Until there is a shift in this basic stance, those who do the caretaking will be treated with contempt. They will be paid little and defined as unsuccessful. If caretaking were actually valued, there would be a revolution in the structure of our society. So I wrote those sentences in 1998. Now, together with Tom Mallison, I offer a path to that transformation. Our book is about new norms that could restructure our lives so that everyone, no matter how important their work, experiences the joy and connection of caregiving, both physical and emotional. The norm would be that all who are able provide roughly 20 to 25 hours of unpaid care every week, an amount sufficient for them to acquire the knowledge and connection that care brings. The need to learn from care grounds our argument that everyone needs to do it. And that is, of course, the most contentious part of the argument, and I'll come back to it. In addition, roughly 30 hours a week would be the upper end of the norm for paid work. We think these profound changes could have vitally important impacts, ending the unsustainable stress on families and the gross inequality for those who provide care. It could ensure that high-level decision makers know something about care, and those who know something about care could become high-level policymakers. Even if caregivers were respected and well compensated, that would not be enough. As long as one group of people makes the policy in corporations and governments and churches, and a different group does the care, we will continue to have dangerously ignorant policymakers. So part-time for all could end the long-standing degradation of care and those who do it, as well as the many policy distortions in all fields of policy that flow from failing to recognize the value of care. As we were completing the book, the global pandemic struck. And at first we thought, well, okay, now COVID will make it obvious that people cannot get their work done unless someone is able to provide care. But I'm sorry to say that this lesson still does not seem to have sunk in at the level of the policy world. So there is still no better time than now to pose the fundamental question. What happens to care when the demands of the workplace ignore the need for care? Work relies on care, but care is becoming unsustainable because of the structure of work and the ongoing failure to value care? Who's supposed to provide care for those who need it when the ideal worker is still someone whose top priority is work? Better publicly funded care for children, the elderly, and people with disabilities is urgently needed. But it will not solve the underlying problems of workplace demands that are incompatible with care responsibilities and a pervasive degradation of care and those who do it. It will not solve the problem of policymakers ignorant about care. So sometimes people say, why are you asking everyone to do care? We just need better publicly funded services. That will not solve the fundamental problems of how work and care are structured. This book presents the argument that the problems of care, its low status, and its unequal distribution cannot be fixed without changing the structure of work. By reducing hours across the board with no exceptions for important jobs at the top, individuals, families, and societies will reap the benefits of a revaluation of care and a whole population who has learned the joys, the skills, and the dispositions of care by doing it. So just a brief caveat that we think that this conversation about how care and work are necessarily intertwined and the need to transform both is a conversation that should be happening all over the world. We do not claim that our particular model of part-time for all will work everywhere, maybe not in countries facing very deep levels of poverty. It's written for the relatively wealthy countries, but the conversation matters everywhere. And the categories, as we heard this morning, of work and care are arbitrary. They're necessary for us to make the argument, but of course, care requires work and good work requires care. And we hope that ultimately, if part-time for all were adopted, the blurring of these categories would become more and more obvious. But for now, we need to talk about the transformation of each. So, of course, there are many problems facing contemporary societies, but our book is focused on 4 specific but interlocking problems. The first is that of stressed families of all forms. In other words, the unsustainable structure of work and family life that puts enormous stress on families and forces many people, particularly but not only women, into untenable choices between work and family. A second major problem is that of inequality. The provision of care is organized around hierarchical lines. The most obvious category, of course, is gender. But today we know that gender intersects with other categories such as race, class, and citizenship status. Right now, those on top, rich white men, you might say more generally important men, do very little care, direct care. The key point is that as long as care work remains stigmatized, as long as powerful men do very little of it and poor women do the bulk of it, society will continue to be profoundly unequal in terms of status and economic well-being. I often say that even if you don't care about gender, you don't care about families, if all you want is equality, you can't get it if you don't transform the structure of care, and you can't do that if you don't transform the structure of work. A third problem is what we refer to as the care policy divide. And that is what I referred to briefly. Those in top policy-making positions in government or business are almost always people with very little experience of the demands, satisfactions, and importance of caregiving. Okay. This means that policymakers are, for the most part, ignorant of a core dimension of human life. This renders them unfit for the job. We should no more consider electing someone for office or appoint them as a CEO of a corporation if they didn't have substantial experience in caregiving. Then we would consider such election or appointment for someone who had never held a job. Our claim is that the knowledge of care is essential to good policymaking. And that necessary knowledge can only be acquired by doing a substantial amounts of hands-on caregiving. Reading novels, talking to your mother, this is a good idea. It's not enough. The final problem that intersects with all of the above is what we call time scarcity. And I used to use the word poverty, but we decided on the word scarcity because there's interesting research that shows that scarcity of all kinds, whether it's food or money or sleep or time, it does something bad to your brain. And most of us, probably everyone in this room, knows what time scarcity means. So, but as an example, in the OECD, 17% of men work over 50 hours per week. In Europe, the average woman in a couple with children works a massive 71 hours a week when you include her unpaid care work. So the roots of these four problems are, of course, complex, but there are two fundamental causes. The first is the dominant norm of who is expected to do care. And who, Joan Tronto's word, gets a pass. Nobody's going to ask them to do care because they're too important. Their work is too important. Who gets a pass from this core human responsibility? The second is the economic system, which particularly in neoliberal countries generates widespread economic insecurity. Right now, all over the world, the only real path to economic security is becoming an ideal worker. Someone willing to work full-time and who can displace family and care obligations to the margins of their lives or onto the shoulders of others. Our book is aimed at the kind of fundamental change that could actually address these deep systemic problems at their roots. Our proposal is for part-time for all. And I should say that I gave up a very good job because my university, the University of Toronto, said no when I said I wanted to move to part-time. But fortunately, there was another law school in Toronto who said yes. So I left. In essence, our proposal is that we need a dramatic change in the dominant norms, not primarily laws, of who does care work. And second, we need a complementary set of changes to our workplaces in order to foster and facilitate a more equitable distribution of care. So let me say a few words about both sides, the care and the work side of the proposal. We think that the heart of the problem have to be new norms that everyone is responsible for providing care. Our proposal is that all capable adults should be expected to perform significant amounts of care work. Sorry, just I had a special edition for my audience in Rome. Which arose in our earlier conversations that people who do good work in their lives, you know, they work for NGOs, they work for the church, they are particularly vulnerable to the temptation to do too much work instead of direct care. Anyway, the idea is that no matter who you are and how important your work is, even if you're a preeminent surgeon or all-star athlete or senior executive, everyone should be doing substantial care, and likewise, everyone should work part-time, that is no more than 30 hours a week. I should say that we do have provision for periods of intensity. So if you're a lawyer, you're on a big case, there might be 3 months you can't take up your care responsibilities. If you do emergency aid work and there's a volcano somewhere, you might be away, but then you come back and you make up those hours of care. So it's not like we ignore that there's such things as intensity, but you accommodate. And also our argument says that practically everyone is capable of learning how to provide decent quality care. And moreover, everyone needs to experience a substantial amount of care work in order to learn what we need to learn from care. And there are many different kinds of care that are needed, so we're confident it can be matched with people's different preferences and abilities. The object is to radically change the norms of who does care. People would encourage one another to resist the pressure of taking on more work and support and appreciate the care that they do. And while we advocate support, not shame, we envision that if in this new culture of norms, if someone announced that at a party, But they don't do this because they're really committed to their work. They're still doing 50 hours to their very important work. Or they said, you know, I'm not the kind of person who's good at doing care, so I don't do that. That this would then generate the sort of concern, disapproval, embarrassment, pity, unease that would currently arise if a competent adult male announced at a party that he had never held a job. The concept of a workaholic would have the connotation of disease that it should have, instead of what it often does have is a sort of mark of pride. So as with current gender norms, people would feel some pressure to conform, but these are norms, not laws. There'd be no bureaucracy to define and measure care. No one would go to jail for working for more than 30 hours a week. No one would be fined for not doing their fair share, changing diapers or washing their own clothes or dishes. But there would be social norms that would frown on it. On this model, the responsibility for care is lifelong. It does not follow the current arc of life stages, intense when your children are young or your parents are elderly. And the way this happens is that in between those times, you join communities of care. They could be a faith group, it could be a neighborhood, it could be a soccer club. You make mutual commitments to the care of one another so that it's pretty even throughout your life. Sometimes it'll be intense with your own family, sometimes it'll be through the communities of care. And we consider care for the earth an important part of this. I won't be talking about that in any detail today, but the reasons are the same. That until we all experience both the care we receive from the earth and the care we therefore owe to the earth, it will remain an abstraction and we won't be able to accomplish the deep changes in values, which are our only hope, I think, for redressing climate change. So for part-time for all to be feasible, thank you, yes. For part-time for all to be feasible, the central economic requirement is that everyone has to have access to good part-time jobs. By this, we mean jobs that are secure, flexible, and high quality. High quality meaning that they provide pay and benefits that are proportional to what is now traditional and good full-time jobs. In particular, for part-time work to be attractive to people, it needs to be reinforced by economic security. A core ingredient of our proposal is a living wage, defined as what one person and a child can live on comfortably at 20 hours a week. Guaranteed annual income would be another way, a vast increase in social benefits. If all your education and healthcare and transportation were paid for, then what you need as a living wage is much lower. We think different countries will make different choices about how to accomplish economic security. And because Tom and I slightly disagreed on the best path, we don't recommend a particular path, but some version of economic security has to be present for this to really work. Otherwise, it's only available to the relatively economically secure and well-off. And sadly, we also will need a solution to the housing crisis, but that is beyond the scope of our book. So unfortunately, none of these things currently exist in the US or much of the Anglo world, and sadly are being increasingly limited elsewhere. Nevertheless, the kinds of economic structures that part-time for all requires are not at all utopian. Many of the elements already exist or have existed in various countries, particularly in Western and Northern Europe. For example, in the Netherlands, a massive 47% of the labor force is engaged in part-time work. It's the world's first part-time economy. And this is even true at the high level of management positions, where one often hears that that's impossible. It is, however, highly gendered. A far larger number of women than men participate. Similarly, a number of countries show that it's completely feasible to provide a robust economic security. For instance, in Denmark, a single mother working 30 hours per week on minimum wage would earn about 22,000 euros, whereas a living wage is only 14,200 euros. So this is not true in New York or Toronto. In sum, we argue that a society of part-time for all could be viably built on four main pillars: quality part-time work, flexibility, or what we prefer to call time sovereignty, economic security, and care-friendly policies. Such a society does not exist anywhere in the world, yet we demonstrate that each and every one of these components do exist. We know that every pillar is feasible, as it already exists in some form, and we see no reason why the pillars could not be combined. This is the essential realism of the project. This is why it's not utopian. And we're not advocating institutions that are unknown or untried. If we can overcome the standard but very real political difficulties of electing care-friendly governments into office, part-time for all is an entirely practical project. It's institutionally sound, economically affordable, ecologically sustainable, and capable of withstanding the pressures of globalization. So I want to close with a few words about the particular challenges for people who are in high status professions. So I wrote this originally for a talk that I gave for lawyers. So lawyers particularly say, oh, it's not possible, we can't do part-time work, even though there are some very good books in the United States that detail exactly how you could organize a law firm around reasonable hours. But I think part of what is at stake here in this resistance from professions is a mythology that excellence requires an intense focus on a single thing, and that long hours are evidence of your excellence and your success. And until we can break apart this nexus of long hours, success, excellence, we cannot move to this, and we cannot move to a kind of more reasonable life. Another point I want to highlight is that we have a long section about what one learns from care, and that's why everybody needs to do it. It's not just about an equal distribution of a burden. It's about equal access to all the benefits that come from doing care. And one of those benefits is the kind of humility that comes from doing hands-on care work. And a related one is that you learn the capacity to take the perspective of others, because you cannot do a good job of care if you're not able to tune into the perspective of someone else. This capacity to take diverse perspectives is absolutely essential to good judgment. And good judgment is important in every profession. So we think that there are really vitally important skills, knowledges, and we use the word disposition. And that's why it's not enough. Some people say, okay, well, I get your idea. How about we have sort of like the military? Everybody spends 2 or 3 years doing care, and then they're done with it. No, this is the kind of thing that is built. It's like character that is built over years of experience of care. So the final point that I want to make about this is that the high status of many professions exacerbates a more general issue. And that is that part of the way we're all trained to think that work is more important than care is that in the dominant culture, the scope and scale of impact are in an inverse relationship to intimate relations and direct care. So if you're the president of a university, you can shape the whole university, and you're high status and you're powerful and you're recognized, but you're not actually touching the students. The people who are doing the one-to-one care, it's by definition low impact. And if you're taking care of a young child, very low impact, right? That kid. And you rescue, a different kind of an example is you rescue a dog that is injured, and that's a one-to-one relationship of care. And it looks like for some people so much less important than, designing a worldwide project for rescuing animals, right? So that's the difference between that big impact, which is very important, and the almost always small impact of direct care. And we're taught that what matters is big impact and not small impact. And that is part of what reinforces the hierarchy of work over care. And I think it's part of why people are resistant to the project here. And we make a point of saying that even important activism, it's not an alternative to care. You may be making very important contributions, but you can't say, I'm saving the whales, I'm not doing the dishes. I think it's coming from my own experience back in the 70s and 80s of male-dominated good work against the war in Vietnam. So I think there's all of these things, these deep cultural norms of what we value need to be transformed. And I think I have now, my current work is really on the environment. And I think that all of these lessons about the centrality of care are equally important there. That if we cannot sustain a deep connection to the earth through care, we'll be still living in an abstraction, and nobody will be willing to make the depth of changes that are going to be necessary to redress climate change. And I think this project of Part-Time for All, it is actually available right now, and it can bring us toward all of these deep transformations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Nedelsky, for this enriching and thought-provoking talk you have given us. I'm sure we all have received a lot to think about and reflect further on. And now we have some minutes for Q&A. So you're welcome to ask your question to Professor Nedelsky, who is here. We will collect some from the YouTube chat, but also you that are here present among the audience. Maybe we start with a question from the audience in the room.
Ask maybe the people to come here so that they to speak in a microphone for the people home and to be framed in the camera. So raise your hand and come towards me maybe. We need the icebreaker. Yes, Marie. Ida Marie. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I read your work and I'm a big fan, so thank you. I was just curious now that you mentioned in the beginning this care for the earth, but you also concluded by saying that activism is not a part of this care. So I was just wondering if you could expand a bit on this relationship between care and a more sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you. So I originally had a sentence in the manuscript that said, activism is not care. And I gave it to a group of colleagues at my new law school, Osgood Hall Law School, and I got some immediate reaction. And because of course that sentence is not right. People are motivated by care commitments to do activism. My point is what I said before. Saving the whales is not, it's very important, but it doesn't get you a pass out of your care responsibility. So that is the main message, that activism is not a substitute for direct care. And it's the same reason why the dangers of people working in NGOs, they are doing this indirect care. And then they think they shouldn't waste their time because of the low impact of direct care. And that is such a powerful thing. I honestly, after having spent, 10, 12 years really focusing on this, I don't think I've overcome these predispositions myself. It always feels more important to do the work than to do the immediate care. So I think this is a very difficult, very deep transformation. And so we must be very sharp about no exemptions. But so now I think that especially in environmental issues, that if our participation is not rooted in a caring relation to the world, and we're not doing things that help everyone actually experience what it means to have the sense that the earth provides us with gifts. There's a very moving section in a book I like very much by Robin Wall Kimmerer called Braiding Sweetgrass. She's an indigenous scholar from the US. And she says that if you buy your food in a styrofoam tray covered with plastic and you pay for it with your credit card, you of course you're not going to experience that as a gift from the earth. Why would you, right? It wasn't a gift, and it's, but so we need to do different things, especially if we live in cities, so that we can build that direct relationship to the earth. Because I think it is a matter of fact that most people in the world really know the dangers of climate change. And they have not been willing to change, and they have not been willing to get their governments to change. So fear is not doing the job. And I think that the only thing that will do the job is a deeply different relationship to the earth, a caring relationship to the earth, that then actually motivates us to say, we can't be destroying this beautiful planet, not because, and so, more prudent resource management, this is not a motivation. I mean, we know this. So this is why I started out by saying, I think this sense of care really has to found our environmental commitments, however we enact them, or they won't go deep enough to get the we know we need huge changes, not little changes, and those have to be motivated.
So I think we've got a few people who raised their hand. I saw one, I saw two, I saw three, I saw four so far.
Should we take more than one question?
I guess so, exactly. That's what I wanted to suggest. So you come here, you do your first, then I maybe take three.
Please, would you mind explain us the connection between education and caring? Because it's something that's missing also in schools, in education of the children or adolescents, and they move out about this. It's not make them proud of caring. This is something which is culture. You're not proud. It's something, okay, it's not so important caring, but it has to do with education and training, I think. So please.
Yeah, we take another question, and I saw somebody here and here. So 1 and 2, come and we collect 3 questions.
Hello, thank you for your lecture. My question is, could you define a little bit more on what care mean institutionally and practically, and how does this change in different contexts? For example, I'm from Brazil, so care, maybe care has a different meaning for the global South and the developed countries. So how does care can be conceptualized in these different contexts?
Last one.
Jennifer, thank you very much. I would like to hear you talk about a bit about the tension between work and care. And if you consider there is also an absolutization of work, people being over-identified with their own work. And this is also part of this challenge. And also care means vulnerability and fragility. And we, as a society, as a dominant culture, seem to be wanting to escape from it. So I would like to hear you say something about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If it's all right, I'm going to begin with this last question. So in the book, I say that there's a deep puzzle underlying the way work and care are organized. And that is that on one level, we know how vital care is. Almost all of us have had a sick child or a sick parent. And if you've had the bad luck of having a nurse who's too tired and rushed to actually pay attention and take care, it's terrifying. And if you have really good caregivers, you're so grateful. So we know the vital importance of care. And yet, how do we organize it? Well, let's give that to the lowest status people in our society. And I think that's a puzzle, right? It's not self-evident. Why would not just our society, but almost every society be organized to give this absolutely central part of human life to the lowest status people, however they're defined in their culture? And I think your question goes to my hypothesis for the answer to that, which is vulnerability and fragility are frightening. When you care for somebody who is very sick or dying, you face that fragility in yourself. You do hands-on care, you can't avoid it. And people want to avoid it. And so they think, okay, we'll get somebody else to do that. And I will define my status to be such that no one will ever ask me because I'm too important. And now increasingly women can fall into that category too. They can hire somebody else to do the hands-on care. So it's not, it is highly gendered, but it's not completely gendered. So I do think that this is a deep underlying issue. And I think that part of the solution, it's a sort of circle. When more of us do it and face it and know that it doesn't destroy you, it enriches you, then that primal fear is actually eased, right? It isn't easy, but but it's not a net loss to you, right? It's not a net cost, it's a net benefit. And so I think that's a huge part of the transformation that we need. And then, you know, as your question started about work and care, that's another piece of the reevaluation, right? That we have to come, and as I said a moment before, I know from my own experience that to actually take seriously that care matters as much as work, especially if you are lucky enough to do high status work. It's a huge transformation. It's as much of a transformation as what I'm talking about, our relationship to the earth. And we have to be moving in that direction. And I think this kind of everybody does care is one of the things that will do it, because then we will have a collective new understanding of care, which resists this hierarchy. So now about, you know, what do I mean by care, and does it vary from conditions? So I wasn't sure exactly what you meant about institutional and practical. So I will just say that care is a huge category. And for the purposes of the book, when we say everybody has to do 22 hours of care, and I should say, just because I didn't have a chance to say it earlier, there was a question about what care dimensions of your work count as care and what count as work. Can you know, if you're helping a student, can you count that as part of your 22 hours? And I think it depends on what you're doing. If you're, you know, helping them go to a conference, that's really work related. If you're helping them because somebody just died in their family and they cannot meet a deadline, that is care that is essential to work, but it's care. So some of the institutional care, you know, the people who work in laundries in hospitals, the people who clean our floors, this is care. This is paid care. It is essential, but it isn't what I'm talking about, because it is not, we specify the care that counts for our 22 hours is care that builds personal relationships. So making sure the hospital is clean is essential, but it is not one-to-one. It is not building personal relationships. And that's part of why even people who do paid care are not exempt. So it's not just the people on the top who are not exempt. It's the people doing the lowly paid care, which we hope will then ultimately be paid better when everybody understands how important it is. But that isn't what we mean. We say you need to be doing this person-to-person care, even if your paid work is a form of institutional care. So there are these different kinds of care. Now, I think I'm not sure exactly what you were thinking about. The big global differences have to do with the levels of need right? The kinds of need that exist in situations where there is vast poverty. And we need collective and institutional responses to that. But the very core of human-to-human care, I think, is pretty close to universal. And it's that kind of thing that we're primarily focused on. And so finally, education. So it's very complicated. I do think that education is an important part of this. You know, we reinforce all kinds of norms in our schools. And so when we know that the norms are work over care, we need to try to address that in education. But I think we also know that if what's happening in your family, if the message is, if you look around and you see your father isn't doing any care work, he's doing important work, and your mother is doing less important work, and she's doing the care, what are children going to learn, right? It doesn't, so education, formal education cannot resist that, right? There has to be a cultural embrace of these norms, which is then reinforced by the formal education. And so you hope that the transformation will keep on going. But, you know, I did go to a high school that both boys and girls took home economics. You know, we learned to use a sewing machine and cook a few things. And I don't think it did anything for but I mean, I learned how to sew. That was something. I sewed my clothes for a long time. But I don't think it shifted gender norms around care. So until it has to be a mutual reinforcement of social and family norms, but then reflected back in the educational system.
Thank you, Jennifer. We have selected a couple of questions from the YouTube chat as well. So I'm reading. Hello, if the destination is part-time for all, how do we get there in a liberal economy starting point that a system has antibodies against such initiatives? Thank you.
A system has, just read the last part.
That a system has antibodies against such initiatives.
Okay.
Do you want the second?
No, give the second,
Yes.
yeah.
Some countries are moving forward into public care systems as part of a necessary structure for gender equality. This might be a necessary step, but how to take it according to your broader vision?
How to take it?
How to take it according to your broader vision?
Okay. Okay, so that's an important question. I'm going to take a second first and just take a moment to elaborate what I said before, that public care systems are underfunded everywhere in the world. And so we need better publicly funded public care systems for people with disabilities, for mental health, for childcare. We need all those things. This is not an alternative. It's an addition. But what's important is that the best form of public provision of care is not an alternative to part-time for all. Because as long as I said before, as long as you still have a division of labor, even if it's not built around gender, the policymakers are one group and the people doing the basic care are a different group, you still have incompetent policymakers. And that won't be fixed by having a very good public child care system, because who's going to be working in that public child care system? Not the guys who are defining that child care system. So we definitely need better publicly funded care. It is not an alternative to what I'm talking about. They both need to be happening. And that's part of why I say that even though it might look like it, this is not an advocacy for a privatization of care, right? That is not what this is about. In addition to excellent public services, we need everyone doing the huge amount of what will remain. One person said to me, oh, well, you know, in my country, there's good public health. I came home from an operation and a nurse came to visit me and that was great. And why isn't that enough? And I said, and who cooked the meals and who bought the food while all this was happening? And that he just had not coded that as part of what was happening. And I will say there's sadly very good evidence that it remains the case that many still predominantly men are actually ignorant of the care they receive that enables them to do their lives. They literally don't see it, whether it's from the secretaries or the people cleaning up their office or their wives. And anyway, so we need both public and private. So the neoliberal economy, you know, this is really a political problem, you know, that we have got to, all of us, in every way we can, claim from our employers fewer work hours if that is possible, manifest being an important person who does hands-on care work, explain to people. I had a colleague, this was many years ago, say to me that it was a big moment in her life when she stopped lying to her colleagues that the reason she couldn't go to a meeting was because she had to take care of her children. She used to tell some other story. I had some other meeting to go to or something. So we want public statements. No, I'm not going because it's after 5 o'clock and I have children to pick up from daycare. So I think those are small ways in which we can manifest our collective commitment to the value of care, which then erodes the profit motive and individualism and status hierarchy that are all part of this neoliberal economy. But that ultimately, that's, you know, that's just a tiny piece of the answer, is we all have to be working at so many different levels to insist upon governments who take care seriously. And, you know, the premise of a neoliberal government really is a privatization of care, right? These are not collective responsibilities. You do it however you want and you pay for it or something. So I think it's, sadly, it's a massive issue and the world as a whole is not going in the right direction. But there are these locations like the economy of Francesco where, where we foster this vision as not utopia, but possible right now that we can all be actively working for.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And we are still receiving questions from the audience from YouTube, but unfortunately we have to close now. But the conversation will of course continue in smaller and other forums after this. So I will just leave the word to Luigino Bruni to conclude.
Actually, I have many comments, many inspiring ideas you generate, Jennifer. Just very short comments. I think the idea that part-time for all is ecological sustainable, I think it depends on how we use the time that we don't work. Because, for instance, think about over-tourism. The people, when they don't work, they travel with flight. Then, but I totally agree with you that in general is more sustainable care than work, but it's more a matter of culture, education. Then I also like very much your. I was very much in love with your approach because you present so important issue, even from an economic point of view, in a new narrative, because it's something that is light, is possible, is sexy, is no, it's true. It's not just because all the ecological narrative is too negative. Don't do, don't die, don't do. If you, it's not enough the don't do narrative for the environment. Please, please.
I just will take this opportunity with the invocation of sexiness. This is a thread in the book that I usually don't have time to present, but I think is very important. That part of what we're talking about is a change in the norms of masculinity. and what counts as attractive masculinity. But this can only take root if women change what they think is attractive. So we women have to change our picture of, the men should be better, stronger, richer, faster, and the whole motif of care doesn't fit with that norm of masculinity. And so you can't be asking the men to change and say, oh, no, that's not my ideal man anymore. So it really is a challenge for all of us to restructure what looks sexy.
Thank you. I finished. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you to all the people following you in YouTube. And thank you very much. See you next lecture.
Yeah, the broadcast is over, but this session, yeah.